Class, MASH. By a Nutty. Chapter 311, The First Change. After checking his status, he turned to his earrings. Well, the flower-like tattoos that had replaced them. They acted as the gateway into his soul, but it was something he had hesitated to use before. His golden body had a strange representation within his soul. It was an impossibly large heavy fruit that vaguely resembled a misshapen gourd. Now that the trial was complete, he figured it would be fine to return. Priscilla was controlling his body and would tell him if something was happening with his friends. Jill was still fighting the boss, and Mash could hear her swearing loudly as she fought. Even if she wasn't taking much damage, she was making a mess. The water was nasty, and he had seen more than a little of it splash in her face. He didn't need to try very hard to ignore her and let himself get pulled inward instead. His soul was different. He could tell immediately. Even before it came to his vision, the overwhelming feeling of hunger had wrapped around him. Saliva filled his mouth and he had to swallow a few times just to get himself under control. Even then he struggled once he could actually see his soul. The golden fruit was enormous. It hung from the tree in the center, but now it had grown to rest against the ground below. The base of the fruit was far wider than the top and it felt like some weird pumpkin. Its surface was a beautiful unblemished gold. The fruit itself was only one of the things he noticed though. The tree that held it had changed too. It had grown bigger. And he noticed that it was moving. Now it seemed to beat as his heart did. The vibrations of the wood seemed to echo into the world around it. Mash hesitantly took a step forward. The desperate sensation of hunger grew rapidly as a sweet scent emanated from the fruit. Normally the sickeningly sweet scent would turn him away, but his feet dragged him toward the odd fruit. It had changed a little like the tree. Although it was a more subdued movement. It wasn't a physical thing, but he felt like the fruit was reaching out toward him. He wasn't being drawn toward it. They were pulling one another closer. He pushed his gaze from the fruit, even as he drew closer to it. His soul itself was fundamentally different. Previously, the tree had seemed to stand upon a tiny plot of land. Now it felt like an entire world was resting at his feet. And that the tree's roots dug through to the opposite end. The marks that had once hung like moons in the sky had shrunk further. Now, they felt like tiny clouds couldn't ever hope to cover his skies. Then there was the final change he noticed. The clouds that had been the class system were gone entirely. His skies were clear, and he briefly gazed into a beautiful starry night. Each star shone with a different color. They were a representation of his magic. His hand brushed against the fruit. The surge of hunger made his stomach churn and hurt. It felt as though he hadn't had a meal in days. And he struggled to contain the urge. Had he ever truly starved? He shook his head and pulled his hand away, even though he planned to eat it. Mash had instinctively known what he needed to do with his golden body. He knew it was a risk though, so one of the things he had done when locked in his brother's house learned about the golden body. He had even spoken to Robert about it since it was their world that had given him the skill. Mash had given Robert an abbreviated version of what had happened with his golden body. Sadly, Robert didn't have much to add. Despite the power being somewhat commonplace in their world, few people got beyond a golden body. So, there wasn't information to gain, though Robert insisted that he should trust his intuition. Mash wasn't so sure about that now though. He wasn't sure if it was his intuition telling him to eat it, or if it was the thing that stopped him now. It was hard for him to know, and he hesitated even as his stomach groaned in protest. He had already decided to eat it and had told the others as much too. So, what made him stop now? Fear. Sweat built on his forehead, and his hands grew clammy. He tried wiggling his toes, only to remember that he didn't really have a physical body. Despite that, he still knew that he could eat it. Slowly, so slowly that he counted 10 beats of his heart, his hand reached into the fruit. The exterior wasn't as hard as it looked. It bent and tore like flesh. The meat of the fruit felt like actual meat, and the juice was red like blood. If not for the sickeningly sweet smell that was coming from it, he would have assumed it was something else entirely. The meat reminded him of a melon, and he shoveled the first handful into his mouth. The sweetness was even more extreme than he anticipated. And the fruit quickly dissolved into within his mouth. He didn't even really know how he was eating, but he didn't stop. Rather he felt like he couldn't stop. Somehow, he knew that stopping early would be the worst decision he could make. He continued eating, bite after bite. The fruit was so large that it felt like it would take days to eat the whole thing. And weirdly he felt his hunger grow with every bite. His hands, or whatever he used for hands here, grabbed larger portions of the fruit each time. He was growing with every bite too. His hunger didn't abate in the slightest. The next chunk he took of the fruit tore it from the branch that it had hung on. Over half the fruit was already gone, but his stomach rumbled for more. And he furiously reached for more of the fruit, taking bites without even bothering with hands. Chunks of the fruit vanished as he pushed further into it. He didn't stop or slow. Red juice splashed about and leaked into the grass around the tree. The tree itself was somewhat stained. The next bite tore more than just fruit from his soul. A part of the tree broke along with it. There was no pain or damage that he could tell. Instead, it felt even more right. The small section of wood crunched like bark and was oddly spicy. The heat spread across his tongue and intensified his hunger even further. He was starving and his whole body ached as he reached for his next bite. This time he tore up a section of the ground, throwing up dirt and grass with the remains of the fruit. The grass and dirt tasted wonderful. He couldn't even understand what it was, but it mixed with the fruit and balanced the overwhelming sweetness. All of this only increased his hunger, and he didn't stop at just the fruit. He started taking chunks out of the tree and the world around him. Hunger urged him on. It was the path he had chosen, and he couldn't stop. Everything was being devoured, and he only barely managed to push Priscilla out of it. He just continued eating, on and on for what like days. His thoughts devolved, and all that remained was the desire to eat. It kept on until he was left with nothing. The whole thing became a blur, and when his senses fully returned to him, he found himself floating in an empty void. The colorful stars that had illuminated the space were gone. Any semblance of the life that had previously been there was gone. The marks were gone too. He didn't even remember eating those. It took him a few minutes to even understand what had happened. He didn't panic or anything, instead returning to his body to find out what had happened. He only briefly took in his surroundings. Notably, he wasn't with his friends in the hallway, but in the center of the boss's room. The red water around him indicated that he had done something less than pleasant. Priscilla could tell him what happened in a second, but he was thinking about something else. His focus shifted inward, hoping his status would show him what he had just done. Name, Mash Stell Lumber Class, Chimeric Vagabond. Level, 137-142. Health, 4101/5010. Energy, 2109/5790. Fortitude, 401/501. Endurance, 229/329. Strength, 343/393. Agility, 379/429. Intelligence, 230/250. Wisdom, 130/150. Charisma, 110/150. Free stats, 60/110. Skills, Hunt Hunger, Magical Layered Wood, Inhuman Hibernation, Chimeric Transformation, Wooden Birth, Chimeric Reconstruction, Vagabond's Path, Chimeric Domain, Reconstructed Adaptable Monster Core, Chimera's Constitution, Wooden Body, Mimic's Avarice, Harbinger of Nothing, Golden Body Devoured Soul Body, Mark of the Devourer. Hunt Hunger, passive. You have gone beyond your limits when fighting enemies and devouring their power. Your limits know no bounds. Gain stats continuously when hunting. Rate increases with hunger. Stats decrease rapidly when out of combat. Current rate, +1 to 100 all attributes per minute. Chimeric Domain, passive. Your eyes just weren't enough. Sense the changes in the mana around you. Connect to the mana and life in your space and inherently understand the nature of the mana and life. Your presence suffuses the space, weakens the magic and strength of enemies beneath you. They cower beneath your might. Current range, 57-75 feet. Devoured Soul Body, passive, unique. You have devoured your own soul, uniting it to your body through the primal action. Your body and soul are one, changes to one are reflected in the other. Changes you make in your body are now permanent. Mark of the Devourer, having devoured the marks of greater beings, you have stolen the keys to their power. Mark those who would become the best of meals. The mark will bring you to them when their power becomes significant. Mash had been amazed by the last set of changes, but this was something else entirely. He felt like the system had been broken. The skills he saw, the way they worked, were just ridiculous. Each of them felt too powerful, hunger especially. His attributes along with the fact that changes to his body could be made permanent were incredible. Things beyond his level or advancement. Even beyond the next advancement. It made him feel like he had done something distinctly wrong. He also had another unique skill. One that practically demanded immediate research. The possibilities were filling his thoughts as his senses returned to the world around him. What happened? What did you do? The message and the shouts mixed together, and he turned to face the voices. A surge of dizziness overwhelmed him, and he stumbled. His foot slipped on something, and he fell into the murky water. Thankfully his sense of smell was gone. However, his sense of taste wasn't, and the vile water had slipped into his mouth. Mash flailed and pushed off the ground with the one foot that was still on the ground. He launched out of the water and collided with the ceiling that was over a dozen feet above him. Before he could fall back into the water, he dug one hand into the ceiling and killed his sense of taste. He just hung there for a second as his senses adjusted. His body was fundamentally different, and his domain was considerably bigger than he had been prepared for. There were just too many changes to adjust to quickly. Mash blinked a few times as he took in his friends, all of whom seemed ready to fight him. It was time to figure out just what he had done. Chapter 312, Craving More. Priscilla. What happened? Mash sent the message in a little bit of a daze. His own thoughts were still struggling a bit to deal with all of the information. It got worse as Priscilla serenaded him with what had happened over the past few minutes. Less than 5 minutes had passed in total, yet the images he was getting made it feel significantly longer. He hadn't lost his mind instantly. Priscilla maintained control of his body for a while. His hunger had built and built until even she had to cave into it. She had started by eating some of his reserves, but his body took over at some point. He switched from the rations and simply charged at the basilisk. The images grew more gruesome and disgusting. He had ignored the water completely and started tearing chunks out of the monster with his bare teeth. Seeing the water flow into his mouth made him shiver. The images melded with his own. They were an echo of what he had done to the fruit. Memories overlapped with what Priscilla was showing him. And he knew that both were real. Despite having eaten the basilisk in its entirety, his stomach felt empty. It ached and twisted with a deep hunger. Although, he didn't feel like he would lose his mind again. His friends had waded through the water and were close enough now that he could reply without shouting. He opened his mouth to do just that. And closed it again without saying a thing. The others were clearly still angry, and they were posturing for a fight. None of them seemed entirely sure if he was going to attack again. He could even feel some of their emotions through his domain. The situation was oddly making him feel better. They weren't afraid. Even with all the emotions running around, he didn't detect a smidgen of fear. What in the world were you thinking? If Priscilla didn't warn us, you would have attacked one of us. Luke's voice was a degree louder than everyone else, though they were all saying much of the same. Jill's version included several curses though. While Lisa's remark was weirdly polite. Mash responded slowly. His mind still felt overwhelmed. Too many different thoughts were running through his mind. Plus, he had to resist the urge to brag to his friends about the changes to his class. Wait, then you don't know what happened. The words came from his lips and that alone. It felt like his mind wasn't involved in the slightest. All we knew was that you were going to go batshit crazy. I teleported everyone out when Priscilla told us that, and that doesn't matter. You could have killed us, asshole. What was that? Jill's responded to his question, and Mash nodded his head as if they were having a normal question. She trailed off a little when she realized. Then she got really angry. Her voice turned into a cascade of shrieks. I upgraded my golden body, and I guess I killed the boss. Mash still felt like he wasn't really responding properly. He was saying half of what he wanted to. How many times are you going to do something like this? Red wasn't shouting. Everyone went silent as she spoke, and Mash knew better than to think that she actually wanted a response. Cold fury radiated from her voice as she continued, her hands clenched tightly into fists. Every single time you do something stupid like this, you promise to let us know next time. And yet here we are again. If not for Priscilla, you very well might have killed Lisa. She was right next to you when. I'm fine. And I'm not particularly mad either. Though I would like to know, why you decided to upgrade the skill then. I thought you said you would do it tonight. Lisa interrupted Red's chastisement. As she said, her voice was as calm as ever. As she spoke it shifted closer to concern. Then she paused and just stared at Mash for a second, then spoke even more gently. I think he needs healing. His mana is off. Mash was busy processing her words and barely reacted when Luke placed a hand on his forearm. His healing worked immediately and the fog that muddled his mind cleared instantly. The clarity gave him realization, and he began formulating his response. This time he was actually able to think about it first. As he thought about the situation as a whole, he did vaguely remember telling Lisa that he would upgrade the skill after they had left the dungeon. Why had he changed his mind? It wasn't boredom as he had pretended. No, it had just felt like the right moment. Was it the boss? It had been his instincts that had pushed him to do it. He realized what it must have been, and nearly shouted it to the others. Inhumanity. I mean chimeric constitution. I think it probably told me that it was the right time for it. I mean it doesn't tell me but something like that. I'm still to blame for doing it, but it was probably what made me think it was the right time for it. Mash wasn't really able to narrow down his explanation well, even with a clear mind. He wasn't certain about the reasoning, and it felt more like an excuse the more he talked. When he realized what he was doing, he shut his mouth. There had to be a better way to go about this. Slowly, very slowly, he took in a breath. His lungs filled completely before he let out a breath. Then he began his explanation again. This time he started from just before, he had started the upgrade and what exactly had happened during it. The way he had known that he couldn't stop. That he would have done more damage had he tried to resist. Although, he also admitted that all of that was just speculation. It might have all been in my head. And even that is just an excuse. I'm seriously sorry. He finished with an apology. There was nothing else he could say in the end. Like I said earlier. I am not angry, nor do you need to apologize. Skills can change people, I know that better than most. And I've done worse to you. More importantly, though, how did your skills change? Lisa replied quickly. Her gaze was straight, and her voice was vibrating with poorly kept excitement. Mash was taken aback. He could have seriously harmed her, how could she just ignore that? Even if she was interested in classes, this was excessive. Mash narrowed his eyes and really looked at Lisa. Studied her mana and expression carefully. His domain revealed nothing, but his eyes showed much. There were small cuts spread across her clothes. Part of her hair was missing too. Now that he was looking, he could tell that she was still injured a little. Lisa, you can and should care about your life. Even without changing your class, you are free to do whatever you want with your life now. I'm not saying you shouldn't advance. Wait, that wasn't. I mean that you should have always cared about your life regardless of your class. Mash let his words trail off as Lisa stepped back as if slapped. The excitement in her eyes swapped with horror, and Mash felt like his insides were turning. Lisa stared at him with wide eyes, and tears began to stream to slide down her cheeks. She futilely rubbed at them with her palms. They continued to fall around her hands, and Mash felt worse. He had wanted to make her feel better. He needed to say something, right? I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to. I was trying to make you feel better. He stopped as Lisa waved one hand at him, her palm open to stop him. She still cried though she forced out a response. Every word was parted by a short breath as she struggled to stop the tears. It's not that. I forgot that my life mattered. And then you said it. And then I couldn't. How could I forget that? It hurt to hear the question. Mash could only imagine how hard it must be to say it. Yet, that was her reality. It was the way she had managed to persevere for so long, and that was the worst part of it. She had needed to think that way. With no way to respond to something like that, he just stood there silently. Mash stared at Lisa, awkwardly watching her cry. Her eyes sparkled a little because of the tears. He could hug her, or at least pat her back or something. His sister had done that for him. But they weren't exactly close enough to do that either. Even if he was quick to form connections, he had only known her for a few days. The sound of Luke clearing his throat loudly made everyone turn their heads toward him. Mash's half-raised hand fall back to his side, as Luke's words broke him from the moment. Let's get out of here. I think we could all use a break. One where we are not knees-deep in sewer water. What preceded that statement was the most awkward dungeon clears that probably ever happened. None of them said anything despite the treasure room that had opened in the center of the room. The water seemed to drain around it, although the actual water level didn't change. Mash's domain let him see that there was an enchantment on the floor, and he guessed it was just moving to another part of the dungeon. The runes surrounded a ladder that descended to a lower section of the dungeon. They had learned about this too and weren't expecting much from the rewards. Mash descended the ladder last. His hand slipped a few times on the wet metal that jutted from the stone. Most of the metal had a brownish hue, which he hoped was just rust. While most of the water was caught by the magic, a few drops managed to slip past. He could see them with his domain, but he didn't have the space to dodge. His back was almost scraping against the stone wall behind him. The cramped feeling only grew as he descended into the room. It was no bigger than a room at an inn. While that normally wouldn't be an issue, it was here when stacks of gold bars filled most of the space around him. The ladder had led directly into the middle of the room, and he was forced to wait on the ladder while the others shoveled some of the gold into their storage spaces. Once they cleared a spot for him, he was finally able to join them. The reward was several thousand gold pieces arranged messily around the room. Mash ignored the gold entirely. His domain let him see past the piles of gold, and he noticed something far more interesting behind one of the walls of the room. He was somewhat tempted to keep it a secret and make a surprise of it, but he reconsidered quickly. There were times for surprises, and this was not one of them. There's a chest behind that wall there. I can't see inside the chest though. Which meant that they should probably take the chest itself. Something that could get around his domain would be extremely valuable. Of course, there is. Red sighed and muttered the comment loudly enough for them all to hear. Mash chafed at the remark. The long day and recent events had definitely worn their patience thin, but she shouldn't complain about a hidden reward. One that very literally wasn't documented in the guild records. Jill gratifyingly smacked Red on the back of the head. She winced and apologized. Sorry Mash. Just tired. He waved her off, recognizing that he was probably the only one who had really gained something. Instead, he let his excitement for the chest push him onward. Whatever was inside was probably extremely valuable. Either other adventurers had found it and didn't report it to the guild, or they were the first people to discover it. Chapter 313, Hidden Rewards. The dungeon so far had been sturdy. In one of their attempts at the dungeon, they had tried to break through walls, thinking that it would be faster that way. They hadn't budged in the slightest. Even Jill with her spatial magic couldn't make the stone budge. Whatever force created this dungeon obviously designed it to have no shortcuts. The creator probably took some perverse pleasure in forcing adventurers to wade through the filth and muck. And now one of those very walls separated him from the hidden treasure. Any ideas? Mash probed Priscilla, thinking that she could probably figure something out. He doubted that force would be here. Priscilla must have believed the same. It must be a puzzle of some kind, magical in nature. He nodded, staring at the wall with more attention as she highlighted the puzzle in question. Lines of mana were woven over the stone. That alone wasn't particularly unique, as the entire dungeon had been like that. That was why he had missed it initially. The puzzle in question blended into the rest of the markings. Now that he saw it, it looked annoyingly complex. How many hours would it take to solve it? Was it even worth it with how tired everyone was? I have found a solution. Priscilla's message almost felt like mockery. At the very least, Priscilla had sent the message after letting him fail at even understanding the nature of the puzzle. He grumbled a little and slowly placed one palm against the puzzle. The wall had no visible signs that there was anything there. Slowly he began pouring energy into the puzzle, making sure to match the symbol Priscilla was showing him. Apparently, she had read the lines of mana to find what shape the puzzle was looking for. He guessed that there were probably some clues throughout the dungeon or something, but this seemed to work just fine. The stone against his palm sunk into the wall and parted. The brick was in a squarish shape and was easily as tall as he was. As the stone slowly shifted, he caught his first glimpse of the chest. Golden paint was discolored by smudges of dirt and dust, but the chest itself was whole. In contrast to everything else here, the chest was obviously made of wood. Why hadn't the wood decayed like the paint? He couldn't detect any hostile magic on the chest. No mana moved through the wood at all, yet his domain still couldn't pierce it. That made him consider whether this chest was even a part of the dungeon or not. The walls and traps had all used mana, but this clearly didn't. It could mean that this chest was placed here by someone else. Moving without much forethought, he reached down and attempted to lift the entire chest. The wooden container itself was already part of the treasure in his mind. His back foot slipped as he failed to lift the chest. The sudden movement made him topple forward and his forehead smacked into the edge of the test. A loud smacking noise echoed in the silent chamber. Though the collision didn't actually harm him at all, and quick glance at the chest showed that it was similarly undamaged. While being free of physical pain was nice, he dreaded the silence that hung afterward. His friends were silent, and none of them made any comments. That didn't stop them from smirking and trading glances, fully aware that his domain let him see everything. He grunted and moved quickly to change their focus. The chest thankfully wasn't locked, and he threw the lid open as fast as he could. Wood crashed against stone as the lid hit the wall behind it. His friends didn't hesitate to rush over, each of them peeking over his shoulders to gaze at the unusual treasure. Mash similarly just stared at the objects. Fruit. The chest contained 5 very recognizable fruits, and nothing else. Red skin and round shapes told him what they were, and his domain showed him that they weren't magical. There wasn't even anything else in the chest. Their very spectacular reward turned out to be a handful of apples. Logic warred with reality in his head. He knew that there must be something special about the fruits. Something like the chest but in fruit form. He knew that, but his eyes showed him 5 very plain, very ordinary fruits. Are those apples? Lisa's question wasn't tinged by sadness or exhaustion. Her voice had regained its eager curiosity, and Mash nodded as he picked up one of the fruits. The surface was smooth and red, and it was just as hard as he would have expected. Yeah, why? Jill casually replied to Lisa, and they talked a little as Mash continued to stare at the fruit. It had to be special. He almost took a bite just to prove it but paused as no one stopped him. He could tell that they were watching though. Even Lisa, who was explaining how apples were rare in the north to Jill. Mash looked at Red and had to ask. You're not going to try and stop me? She seemed genuinely confused for a second. You have a skill that will stop anything you eat from harming you. If anyone is going to test an unknown food item, it will be you. There was no hesitation at all in her voice and everyone else was nodding. Mash didn't need any more encouragement. He wanted to eat the fruit already and stuffed the entire thing into his mouth. His jaw changed shape to fit the fruit, and he bit down hard to crush it. The sound of chewing filled the room as everyone waited in anticipation. Mash swallowed the fruit without chewing or tasting it properly. He couldn't even say if it was sweet or not. Large chunks were visible through his throat as it went down. He knew it wouldn't be pleasing to look at it, and both Jill and Luke looked away when it happened. Mash just wanted to get it down as quickly as possible. It took a second, but then he felt it. The familiar rush of power brought an unbidden smile to his face. His friend's reaction and the world around him bled away as his focus shifted inward. He brought up his status excitedly. Already knowing what to expect, he scanned his status quickly. Name, Mash Stell Lumber Class, Chimeric Vagabond. Level, 142-147. Health, 4101/5010. Energy, 2109/5790. Fortitude, 501. Endurance, 329. Strength, 393. Agility, 429. Intelligence, 250. Wisdom, 150. Charisma, 150. Free stats, 110-160. Skills, Hunger, Magical Layered Wood, Inhuman Hibernation, Chimeric Transformation, Wooden Birth, Chimeric Reconstruction, Vagabond's Path, Chimeric Domain, Reconstructed Adaptable Monster Core, Chimera's Constitution, Wooden Body, Mimic's Avarice, Harbinger of Nothing, Devoured Soul Body, Mark of the Devourer. There weren't a lot of changes to look at, but what he saw made him laugh. He laughed and laughed, ignoring his friends' questions and prods. Priscilla shared the information with the others though, and they each grabbed one of the apples greedily. None of them started eating, their gazes passing over the fruits fervently. It gave levels. That was unheard of as far as Mash knew, and wasting them would be among the worst things they could do. He didn't regret eating it though. It would probably only be a day or two now for him to reach the next advancement. Is it a set amount of levels, or do you think it depends on a person's level? If it's the second, then Lisa would gain a lot if she ate it now. Jill's suggestion was shot down immediately by Red, Lisa, and Luke. All 3 of them looked completely horrified at the mere suggestion. No, at the very least we will save it until we reach level 145. If not later. Red told Jill what to do and pushed Jill's right arm down to stop her from even trying to eat the fruit. Jill looked like she wanted to protest, but she let her hand fall back down. Red was a little taller than Jill and used all of that height to give her a disapproving glare. If we end up not needing to use it, we can probably sell it for millions of gold, if not more. Red spoke like an angry mother chastising her child, and Jill appropriately wilted beneath her. They all put the fruits into their storage, and Mash stored Lisa's fruit in his space. With that last reward received, they spent the better part of an hour trying to remove the chest. They failed spectacularly. The chest was sturdy beyond belief. All magic had just failed to even affect it. It almost seemed to exist separately from mana. Even Jill's spatial explosions couldn't damage it. Once that failed, they had just given up. It was already well past time to leave, and Jill teleported them out. The rest of their night was marred with a discussion of the fruits and the dungeon. They were hopeful, imagining what they would do if there were more fruits in their next run. A good night's rest did a lot for their state of mind. The amazing fruit had already improved their moods and sleep fixed the rest. Furthermore, they decided to do half as many runs and also clear the dungeon earlier than needed. Time went by quickly on the second day, and they fell into a rhythm with the dungeon. And almost everyone gained at least one level. Almost, since Mash didn't gain any, it was only a small disappointment though. He had already gained more than he expected because of the fruit anyways. Sadly, there were no more fruits on any of their subsequent runs. It seemed like a reward that they could only receive once. The second day similarly went by without much difficulty. He did get to experiment a little with hunger and wasn't sure about the skill. Since changes to his body were permanent, he was significantly stronger and faster. The subtle improvements from hunger just didn't feel impactful. Hunt's flat boost had been more noticeable. The bigger advantage was the freedom it offered him. The stats didn't immediately vanish when he stopped fighting and he no longer got paralyzed afterward. The bonus attributes took a while to decay too. On the third day, he managed to gain a level again. He was glad for it but knew that it would take even longer for the following 2 levels. The problem was that it was growing annoying. The levels were nice, but the dungeon was terrible. Even Lisa started to lose the initial rush of excitement that had carried her along so far. They were looking for other dungeons. Even if they were a little riskier or easier. Jill, Red, and Lisa teleported back to the capital that night to do some more research. Mash was the only one who wasn't supposed to go back, and Luke stuck with him to be a good friend. 3 days turned to 5, and then a week before they found another dungeon. Mash hadn't gained another level, and he was fairly sure that the repetition was reducing the rate at which they leveled. They had managed to produce a much larger list of dungeons now, but some of them weren't exactly on the kingdom. It would be fine so long as they didn't tell anyone, but his brother wouldn't like it. They deliberated it for a while but finally decided on another dungeon when Lisa suggested it. She had been the most patient of them all, and her request was given the consideration she deserved for it. Chapter 314, Time and Frustration. The next month progressed quickly for everyone but Mash. They had been leveling steadily over the many dungeons they had visited. They had also gained a bunch of magical items. None of them were particularly useful or valuable. Only Lisa found things to use, and that too only for utility, like a storage item. Now, they had enough money to custom order some magic items though, and they spent their nights planning on what to get. Most of the dungeons had tended to be easier than the sewer labyrinth. The only one which was in a swamp was more difficult, and that too mostly because the mud in the dungeon had been magical. It would stick to whatever it contacted, and they couldn't remove it so long as they were in the dungeon. Without Jill's ability to teleport them out, one or more of them would have suffocated from the mud. That had been when Mash realized that something was wrong. That dungeon had been harder than any of the others. The boss had been an amphibian monstrosity that could use mud magic. It was one of many affinities that Mash had acquired on their trip. There were plenty of repeats too, but he still gained a lot. That wasn't the problem. He stopped leveling. The others were steadily catching up, but he was stuck with one level left for his next advancement. It had been like that for over a week now. Jill had tried asking the guild, but they didn't have anything to add. His situation was of course unique. He really shouldn't have expected anything else at this point. At that moment, they were flying to their next dungeon. Mash was carrying Lisa, and they had been talking about skills and enchantments. Lisa was explaining how there were skills and classes that would allow them to improve magic items. Most rich families hoarded items for a reason and she told them to do the same. Their next advancement could offer something that would utilize their slowly building horde. Who knows, maybe we will get an item to give me another level. Mash grumbled his complaint as they flew. He didn't like complaining like this and immediately felt bad for making the comment. His frustration was his own as far as he was concerned. Lisa didn't seem bothered by it and even offered a solution. I still have the apple if you want it. Lisa had proved too kind for her own good. It was excessive, a byproduct of her time as a slave and her natural tendencies. Mash shook his head. Tempting though the offer was, it was far too much to ask for. He should be able to level without relying on it. Plus, they didn't even know if it would work and wasting it would be horrible. No, more than that, he just didn't want to take something that valuable from her or anyone. That would just make him feel wretched. No, there is probably something stopping me. I doubt the fruit would even work. His words dragged on as he sighed. Maybe it's like the level 100 trial. That's the only thing I've heard of that could stop someone from leveling. That or just refusing the advancement, but I don't think that's applicable here. It wasn't a bad idea. Lisa's suggestion had some merit, seeing as he hadn't tried to start a trial like before. He had always entered the dungeons with the others. The idea of a trial made some sense to him. It wasn't like it would hurt to try, he could just escape any dungeon if it proved too dangerous. Jill and he were proving that the ability to escape dungeons on demand was incomparably convenient. It made entering more dangerous dungeons viable and let him avoid some of the nastier mechanics behind those dungeons. That's not a bad idea, and I feel kind of dumb for not thinking of it. He spoke while letting Priscilla share the idea with the others. Lisa shrugged her shoulders briefly. It's not like I thought about it before now, and usually those special trails only happen at the larger interval levels like 100 and 200. Still, it seems like something I should have tried already. Mash formed a more concrete plan for the remaining trip. It wasn't so much a plan as a method to get in contact with the others if needed. As a bonus, he agreed to leave the trial and check with them at the end of the day. While that could hurt his chances to complete the trial on his first attempt, it would at least prove that he was on the right track. There was a pretty good chance it just would work too, that a trial wasn't what he needed. The others didn't have a problem with it, especially since both he and Jill could travel in and out of dungeons freely. Jill could come to get him if it became necessary. They arrived at their next destination within an hour. The dungeon in question was connected to an abandoned building. One of its entrances had been changed into the dungeon portal. This dungeon was famous for having almost no monsters in it. But it made up for the lack of numbers with power. The dungeon was home to a handful of powerful undead. Undead that had retained much of their skills and stats. It was said that the house had belonged to a lich and that their creations and that they had created the dungeon somehow. Mash was more inclined to believe those rumors, now that he had skills that could functionally do the same thing. Plus, the house gave off that vibe. Spider webs and scratches covered the wooden walls. Every window was broken, and pieces of glass were still embedded into the window frames that he could see. There were actually other people hovering around the dungeon entrance. Mash could see them, and he was fairly sure they weren't strong enough for this. They kept fidgeting and glancing at the house and then at him and his friends. If they were that nervous already, the dungeon itself was probably out of their league. He gave the group one last look before turning to his friends. They are probably going to need help. He didn't speak particularly quietly, and he hoped the adventurers would take the hint. They either couldn't hear or choose to ignore him. Luke obviously missed what he had been trying to do and replied swiftly. I noticed that as well. I will see if they would like to enter together. We could help for one run at least. But we can do that once you're gone. Luke smiled at Mash, seeming somewhat proud of his friend for bringing the idea up. Mash decided to let the misunderstanding be and just nodded. He may have thought like Luke once, but he wasn't as willing to trust random adventurers anymore. It wouldn't be his problem either. And his friends could handle themselves. Mash spoke with confidence as he said his goodbyes. Well, I guess it's time to go. I'll hopefully see you guys tonight. Wait. Give me one of your marks. Won't it let us know if you die? Lisa stepped closer to Mash as she spoke. Not that I think that will happen, but it might help in other ways. And you can never be too safe. Mash was a little surprised by how worried she was. The others didn't seem anywhere near as concerned, and he wasn't particularly worried either. A lot would have to go wrong for him to be in any real danger. Are you sure? I'm not exactly sure what the mark does. Also, Luke might be a better. No, I also just want it. Your marks helped you get your class right. I want something that free. Lisa was struggling to remain calm. Her face and voice drooped as she grew dejected. Mash still didn't think it was a very good idea. I think it was breaking the marks that did that. He looked to the others for some support, but they were giving him a look that said it was between the two of them. He wanted to sigh but didn't since Lisa was staring directly at him. Then he realized something. She was an adult and deserved to pursue freedom however she saw fit. Even if it felt like this was the wrong way to go about it, the decision was ultimately hers. He said as much. Fine. I will do it, but I still think it might end poorly. He held out his hand to give her the mark. She didn't immediately grab his hand, instead, she hesitated a little before opening her mouth. Thank you, I will take the mark. But how does it look and where will it be? Is it liking a tattoo? Ooh, that's a good question. A weird tattoo on your hand would have been awkward. Jill interjected as the tense moment of debate had vanished. His friends were being extremely careful around Lisa, and he wasn't entirely sure if that was a good thing yet. This time Mash did sigh out loud. It won't be anywhere. If I had to bet, it will be in your soul like mine were. I wouldn't bet on it, he's got a thing about tattoos. Jill was well and truly making things harder than he needed to be. Red and Luke were both offering suggestions for possible locations. Mash decided to leave them to their stupidity and patiently waited for them to finish their deliberations. Idly, he started counting the seconds. It took 2 whole minutes for her to settle on a location. Ultimately, she settled for a completely boring location and jutted one elbow out toward him. He placed his hand on her bicep and noticed that she was surprisingly muscular. The thought was strange, and he stopped focusing on it as soon as he felt his skill activating. A stinging pain spread from his palm and ran down his arm. He pulled his hand back reflexively, unsure of what he had done. He stared at his palm, which was stained red with his blood. He just stared at it for a moment, before turning toward Lisa. His blood was moving down her arm, and alarmingly up it too. It spread over her shoulder and slightly onto her back, dissolving the clothing that would have resisted. Her clothes didn't burn but got eaten by the blood in a way that stopped anyone from trying to swat it away. Mash, stop whatever you're doing. Luke said it as he rushed over to heal them both. Mash would do it if he could, but he wasn't doing anything anymore. All he had done was start it. Luke's healing repaired his palm quickly but wasn't doing anything for Lisa, not that she seemed hurt. Thankfully, it didn't seem to be hurting her, although her eyes were wide as she stared at the blood. It spread over her entire arm and hand too. When it stopped moving, her sleeve had been completely devoured, and her arm was covered in a thin layer of blood. When it was all over, the blood started to fall from her like a normal liquid. As soon as the first drop fell, all of the blood got pulled toward Red's outstretched hand. Her brows were furrowed, and her arm seemed tense as she drew the blood. It left behind a tattoo, and Mash winced as he saw it. It was not limited to just her bicep. The tattoo spread across her entire arm and extended out onto her back and chest a little. It was also extremely weird. It looked like a bunch of bite marks. As if many creatures had been fighting over the same piece of meat. Some of the teeth-like indentations were large, while others could have belonged to a common mouse. The colors varied with the shapes. One was red and looked more like a set of small puncture wounds. Another was jagged and uneven. The tattoo would have been scar-like if not for the odd bright colors of some of the marks. And the coloration was arbitrary too, with one of the marks shifting from yellow to blue in an especially odd way. Mash was able to see everyone's reactions to the tattoo. Lisa didn't seem to be giving it much attention. Her gaze was foggy, probably busy checking her status. Luke just seemed worried. Jill and Red, though, they were very clearly angry. Mash could practically feel the moment when their gazes turned from the mark toward him. As it turned out, he was conveniently standing next to the dungeon portal and waved them goodbye before stepping inside. He would deal with consequences at dinner. Chapter 315, Interlude. Lisa 1. Lisa POV. Lisa watched the blood coat her arm. It felt odd, as if she had dunked her hand into a vat of honey or something. She felt it doing more than just sitting on her skin though. The blood was seeping into her body, somehow passing her normally reinforced skin. Not to mention eating away at her clothes like a million little insects. She didn't really care about revealing some skin, but was still relieved when it stopped a little past her shoulder. It was more than a little terrifying seeing something just bypass her defenses like that. And it was somebody else's blood too. More than that, she was interested beyond belief. She was fascinated by classes and skills and had gotten a skill that even let her somewhat understand what other people's skills might do. It gave her a kind of forewarning about a person's abilities. She loved the skill when she had first received it but had come to hate it from her time as a slave. A skill like that was valuable to any person. However, it was even more valuable to the slavers. She managed to push back the sobs and moved her attention back to the blood. The blood that was being pulled off of her by Red. The blood was leaving a far larger and more elaborate tattoo than she had expected. She had expected some kind of physical representations, as skills like these tended to leave them, but this was even more than she could have imagined. The tattoo made it seem like she had been bitten. Many, many times. They crisscrossed one another, spreading over her arm, hand, and even palm. Each bite mark was a different random color. The largest marking appeared around her shoulder. That one seemed like a dragon's bite, and it enclosed the tattoo around her arm. That bite mark was semicircular and black and wrapped around her shoulder blade, even extending a little bit onto her chest. She was momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of a tattoo like that. It wasn't something her parents would have approved of. Her old master would have definitely hated it. She remembered how disturbingly obsessed he had been with making sure her skin had no marks on it of any kind. That time she couldn't stop herself from shivering at the very thought of it. She forced her attention back on the multicolored tattoo. The mark of her savior. The mark of her freedom. Then she shifted her focus inward. Name, Lisa. Class, Bonded Mana Dancer. Level, 138. Health, 1980/1980. Stamina, 2010/2010. Mana, 5110/5110. Fortitude, 198. Endurance, 201. Strength, 101. Agility, 302. Intelligence, 501 plus 10 511. Wisdom, 200. Charisma, 302 plus 10 312. Free stats, 0. Skills, Sheriff's Mana, Mana Armor, Haste, Master's Message, Leads Supporter, Mana Signature, Temporary Mana Battery, Dancer's Pole, Partner of Mana, Mask of the Slave, Bound Dancer's Chain, the Devourer's First Marked. Sheriff's Mana, your charm is magical, influencing the very mana itself. Changes to your charisma also affect your intelligence. Mana Armor, a thin layer of mana shields your body, partially blocking damage from all sources. Your mana is your first line of defense. Does not work with standard armor. Damage reduction, 75%. Haste, use your mana to drastically improve your dexterity. Burns mana at a constant rate for the improvement. Rate, plus 50% dexterity, 10 mana/second. Master's Message, send short mental messages to anyone you have met. Limits on size and distance vary based on closeness. No limits when sending or receiving messages from your master. Current master, none. Leads Supporter, expend mana to improve your eyes and mind, allowing you to glimpse into the flow of another's movements. Understand the shifts in their muscles and gaze. Follow in their footsteps without missing a beat. Mana Signature, imprint your mana upon other objects or spells. Treat the object as if it was one created by your own magic. Temporary Mana Battery, your incredible understanding of mana and skills opens an avenue for its containment. Store a magical spell or effect. Convert the mana to use for your own purposes. The contained mana will slowly decay if not used. Dancer's Pole, tug on the emotions of those around you. Your very presence draws the eye. Know how to tug and pull at others' emotions. Partner of Mana, the chosen partner of mana itself, you attempt to dance with its grand form. Manipulate the mana with your movements. Your partner flows to your rhythm, improving the rate at which your mana recovers. Mask of the Slave, in order to best serve your master, you can instinctively understand his intentions. Maintain your master's desired physical or mental state. Current master, none. Bound Dancer's Chain, unique as a bound dancer, your master has access to your mana. A dancer is never alone. Gain access to the magic of those that hold your leash. As they pull on your mana, you pull on their magic. Current master, none. The Devourer's First Marked, unique, the first to be marked by the Devourer, your growth is chastened by their influence. Struggle to avoid becoming the creature's next meal. The monster's interest is not without benefit. Gain levels more rapidly. Grow quickly, for your time will be limited by its patience. The mark was something else entirely. It did even more than she could have expected, and her lips tugged upward in a smile. She didn't know that there were skills that could improve the rate at which someone leveled. The ominous words of the skill didn't bother her at all. The benefit was incredible, to the point where she would have traded far more than some skin for it. She had wanted out of a desperate belief that it might help her get rid of her class, and this would do that and then some. When her focus shifted back to the world around her, she looked around for Mash. She couldn't ever really repay him for what he had done, but she could at least thank him for this. Her gaze darted back and forth until she realized he wasn't there. Red, Jill, and Luke stared at the dungeon's entrance. She could connect the pieces, but not the reasoning. Did he leave? She was able to hide her hesitation easily, her skills let her control her own emotions too. That didn't stop her from feeling a little abandoned. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate or like the others. All four of them were her heroes, and she would be eternally grateful to all of them. Despite that, she felt most free and comfortable around Mash. It was probably due to his skills, not that she minded. It just felt harder to be open now that he was gone. Can you believe him? After doing something like that to your arm he left, just like that. Without even apologizing properly. Jill's response actually surprised Lisa. She didn't blurt out her response. Her surprise barely showed, her eyes only widening a little at the idea. Why would he apologize? She had received a gift far beyond anything she could have imagined. She didn't say this out loud though. The fact that she was angry on her behalf was nice but unneeded. And more importantly, it was unfair to Mash. On a basic level, she had asked for the mark. Even had it covered her entire body, she wouldn't blame him. He had even tried to dissuade her since it had been untested. As a result, she had stolen the opportunity from him to grant such a skill to his family or friends. The guilt wiggled into her thoughts, and she found the courage to dispute Jill's words. No, I want to thank him. I got a unique skill for getting the first mark. It lets me gain levels faster. I know you're just trying to be concerned for me, but I don't need it. And it's not fair to Mash. Lisa said what was on her mind, trying her best to word it carefully. Even still her heart thrummed loudly with each word. Her skill stopped her emotions from appearing on her face, but her stomach felt twisted. The fact that nobody had said anything in response, made it worse. The silence hung in the air. A window that made her feel small before the others. You're right, of course. But you also don't understand the frequency of these kinds of things. Our patience isn't endless, or rather, we are the only ones who can restrain him. You don't know half the crazy things he has done. Red was especially cautious with her tone. She was clearly trying her best to not disagree with Lisa. This was the other reason she felt more comfortable around Mash. For all he worried about her, it didn't come out in this overly protective way. She was over level 100, yet these three couldn't even talk to her properly. It felt too much like pity, and she was tired of that reaction. Lisa thought about what Red said though. Giving her words the proper consideration, they deserved. She had only known Mash for a little while. Still, there was one fact that pushed her to disagree. It works though, right? I mean, you are all really high level and are growing faster than anyone else ever, I think. With this skill, I will be leveling even faster than that. If you didn't trust him or want the benefits of being around, you would have left. Her first sentence had been her pure unfiltered thoughts. She nearly panicked after saying the somewhat rude words and tried to explain the meaning behind them. It came out a little rushed, but they weren't going to interrupt her either way. It's not that we don't trust him. If anything, he is probably the most trustworthy person you'll ever meet. He is annoyingly straightforward. Because of that, he tends to cause problems. He's not alone though. Jill and I cause problems too. Our classes would cause big issues if they came out. Through it all, we have stuck together. Now we are all holding up the same mountain. None of us can back out without crushing everyone. So, I bark at him when he does something stupid or careless. I'm not really all that angry right now. I would have just had him apologize or something. We're kind of like a family, and he is literally the youngest and craziest of the group. Considering what you said though, maybe we all need to get one of those marks. That's not the point though. Just because he saved your life, doesn't mean you can't get angry at him or anything. He's just a person. Red's long response caught more than Lisa off guard. Luke and Jill stared at her as if she were going to explode. A tiny bit of color touched Red's normally stern and pale face, and she seemed just as shocked by her own words. Her open response was practically forced out of her. Lisa's skills had subconsciously pulled on Red's emotions, causing her to respond more freely. Such an honest response left Lisa with nothing to say. The awkward silence had returned. Chapter 316, Mana Loss. Mash didn't know what he expected to see upon entering the dungeon. Half his mind thought that he would end up in the actual dungeon instead of a special trial. But it seemed like Lisa was right. Rather than the luxurious interior of someone's home, he was standing in a forest clearing. Simple trees of brown wood and green leaves framed the clearing like a fence. It was almost perfectly placed so that his domain didn't reach into the trees. All he could see was the grass and dirt around him. A clearing like this didn't bother him. Something else about the place made his skin crawl though. It was like waking up to find that the air tasted different one day. Still like air, but just strange air. He couldn't quite place his finger on it, but Priscilla did notice it. There is no mana here. None, even the mana in your energy has been drained or dimmed somehow. She didn't need to explain the consequences. His hand shot forward as he attempted to open a portal. Nothing happened. Not a single thing. That was a problem, one that he didn't think of either. He had never heard of a dungeon that disabled mana at a fundamental level. Why did that even work on him? It wasn't like he used mana. Mana in all forms is gone. The magical aspects of our energy have vanished as well. I expect it is a law of this place. Mash groaned loudly. His friends were going to bother him about the mark, and if he didn't get back on time, they would be even worse. Not to mention there was the other aspect of their plan too. Jill would wind up stuck here with him if too much time passed. Which very well might happen. The problem was that he didn't know how much time was being warped in here. A fey here could be a year for them for all he knew. Maybe Jill had already tried and failed to teleport to him. Plus, the lack of magic would limit most of his abilities. All of these factors probably should have incited some panic, but he felt fine. Calm even. Even without mana of any kind, he was not weak. His domain still functioned, so his other passive skills probably still worked too. More than that, his body wasn't ever something that could be called weak anymore. Priscilla was quite good at utilizing the new permanence of his transformations. She had helped him make a lot of small modifications to his body to get the best possible performance. There were plenty of things that he didn't even know about. He had even restricted her from changing his outward appearance too much. Also altering things like his height felt weird, so he wasn't that different physically. She worked around that limitation easily, fundamentally changing how his body worked. Somehow, she had modified his eyes and made his vision better. Some changes were more drastic than others, and it felt weird. Priscilla had made changes to his bones and muscles by mixing and changing his forms. Experimenting with his body like that was weird, to say the least. When she wanted to change more sensitive things like his organs, or the basic functions of his body, she had Luke watch. All of those changes had culminated in a body that was easily an advancement beyond him. And that was the bare minimum. Even without using his full dragon form, he was a lot stronger and faster. His reaction times were better, and his natural process was inhuman. More than a few of the creatures he had eaten had the ability to regenerate significant injuries. It wasn't strictly healing and burn through his energy, but it worked. His body required a lot more food now too. It produced almost no waste, but he still had to eat a lot. Beyond the dungeon, his biggest concern was his next meal. His storage space had a plethora of food in it. In fact, he had dumped nearly everything that wasn't edible out and stuffed it with monster corpses. Even if the meat rotted, he could still eat it. The others had enough room to carry everything that had been in there, though he had removed all of his prepared weapons and creations. He couldn't open that space now, and he didn't see anything that seemed particularly nutritious. With all of the changes done to his digestive system, his body could probably take the nutrients from the very dirt if he needed to. But that would be a lot of dirt, which he would need to eat by the handful since his wood magic wasn't working. There was nothing but grass and trees though. At least that made his immediate course of action obvious. Secure a source of food and water. One that was preferably endless, or close enough to it. He looked around once more. Then he let his knees drop a little before jumping with all of his strength. Cracks spread from where he jumped, and he flew far higher than he had intended. The trees shrunk as the air rushed past his face. His gaze darted around rapidly as his ascent turned into a fall. The forest around him was encompassing, but it wasn't endless or empty. A city or village existed like a shadow far to the east. He also saw a river that seemed to lead straight to it. The river wasn't that far from him. The source of water and food was a huge relief. His vision let him see more than that though. Small movements among the trees. So subtle that he would have missed it without the changes to his sight. Signs of life that were gradually approaching his location in the form of small unnatural movements of leaves. His hunger churned, and he hoped that they were monsters or animals. While people might lead for to a way out, he wanted to satisfy his hunger first. His feet touched the ground like falling logs. He kicked off the ground at the same moment, dashing toward the signs of life. The noise would alert the creatures, but he was confident in his ability to catch them. He charged into the forest, pushing through bushes and grass without slowing. His eyes darted back and forth, piercing through the trees to find the creatures he knew should be there. He saw it. Brown fur covered an enormous creature that was charging at him. Large tusks and a snout made it some kind of wild hog. It didn't fear him, and he could understand why. It was half again his own height, and he didn't have sharp tusks. He did have sharp teeth, and they flashed through a wide smile as he rushed the beast. It was big, strong, and fast. If he was of average strength for his level, a monster like this might pose a challenge. Now, he tore through it. In a literal sense. He thrust his hand forward as the boar tackled him. His fist met with the monster's skull and plunged into it. Gore exploded from it, drenching his arm in red blood. The thick stench instantly flooded his nostrils, and his stomach growled. He pulled his arm out, feeling only a small twinge of pain around his knuckles. It would heal, he was sure of that. He walked around the large animal, glad that the meal had delivered itself to him. Even with his endless hunger, a monster of this size could hold him over for a few days if he was conservative. The rustling of the leaves he could hear made him think that he wouldn't need to be. That thought broke as he saw the arrowhead embedded in the creature's back and felt the newcomers step into his domain. Their shape alone was enough to identify them. Humans with no unusual features pushed through the forest. Mash waited for them to come to him and tore off a piece of meat from the creature's side. Its skin was tough, and he didn't like the feeling of fur in his mouth. He ignored those things and continued to eat the meat. It was satisfying. More importantly, he was hungry, and it was food. He continued to eat the bland meat, as he watched the people whisper to one another. With the improvements to his hearing, he could vaguely pick out a word or two from the conversation. Swallowing once, he called out to them, tired of waiting for one of them to gain the courage to approach. "Hello there. I know you're there. Also, I'm not an enemy or hostile in any way. Just hungry, and in my defense, I couldn't see the arrowhead with all the fur in the way. Plus, I was hungry." The group in question rushed out and dropped to their knees. It was a universal gesture, and Mash groaned internally. He didn't like gestures of reverence, especially when there was no reason for it. Even if they had seen him kill the boar, it shouldn't provoke this kind of reaction. "Please, Prince. Forgive us. You can of course take whatever you wish. We only ask that you leave us the hide. Winter comes and we..." The man at the front was rushing through his words, and he cut off when one of the women behind him touched his leg. Mash's eyes narrowed as he examined the group. 2 men and 2 women prostrated themselves before him. They wore clothes of fur, brown and black much like the boar's own hide. All 4 had dark brown hair and tan skin. He couldn't see anything else with their heads pressed into the grass. His mind worked, trying to figure out what had happened. Maybe this was like the other dungeon. An act where he was playing some kind of character. "Stand up. Why do you think I'm a prince?" Their heads snapped up and they leaped to their feet in alarm. Wide eyes stared at him in obvious fear, black irises blending with their pupils gave them a slightly odd look. One of the girls, who looked to be 10 or 11 at most, was even tearing up. And one of the men tried to move a little to shield the girl from him. Mash knew he didn't exactly look harmless. One of his arms was entirely drenched in blood. His eyes were disturbingly inhuman, and his teeth were weirdly sharp. Not pointed like a shark, but sharp like a rack of knives. His hair was now a pure white color and was also a little red from the boar's blood. More blood ran from his mouth in a distinctly vicious way, and he realized his own stupidity. The group's reaction made a lot of sense now that he actually considered his appearance. He could have handled this better. Chapter 317, Handling It Better. Mash cleared his throat as the group remained silent. A gust of wind rustling the leaves was audible in the strange silence. They had stood upon his command but seemed paralyzed. It almost seemed like they would have felt more comfortable kneeling. He thought back on the conversation and decided to change his approach. Let's try this again. I am Mash. Not a prince or anything. Also, I'm human. Mostly. He paused, taking a second to think before continuing. You can take the monster's hide. I just need the meat. Also, why did you think I was a prince? He let the question linger at the end, hoping that his offer of the monster's hide would loosen their lips. The biggest man stood at the front, and he took a small step forward. His hand slowly fell to a hand axe that hung loosely on his belt. The wrinkles around his face deepened as he tried to meet Mash's eyes. The man's eyes narrowed slightly as he examined Mash carefully. He spoke then, his voice revealing the trepidation he obviously still felt. You know the language of rule. Only the Lord and his children may speak the language openly. And your strength is surely a sign of your glorious blood. Mash held a hand up to stop the man. He didn't like where the conversation was headed and needed an explanation. Mash was about to say that he wasn't speaking this language of rule but froze. The item to communicate across languages wouldn't work without mana, would it? He had assumed that it was the item that let him understand these people. That was clearly not the case, which made this prince all the more interesting. Let's go with the assumption that I am not one of these princes. Who are they? Who is this lord? Mash's curiosity bled into his question. The man's face went white, and his eyes darted to the forest around him. He was afraid before, but now it was far worse. The man's hands slammed together in what would have been a clap. They stayed together, and he held them up to the sky in what was an obvious prayer. Forgive me, my lord. I had not meant to invoke your language with one who should not be speaking it. The man's voice was deeper than Mash's own, but the way it quivered made him seem like a small child. Mash resisted the urge to smack the older and tried to speak calmly. I don't think anyone is listening. Please tell me about this lord. I feel like it's important considering he speaks the same language as me. I cannot. Unless you are somehow related to the lord. The man sounded almost desperate with the question. It was almost like he needed Mash to claim that he was related, even if it was a lie. Well, there was no reason not to, as far as he understood or cared. There might be some implications to the claim if he ever got to meet this lord, but that was already his plan, so this just seemed beneficial. This lord would probably understand either way. Let's go with that. My guess is that this lord of yours and I come from the same place. Now, can you please just answer my question? The older man let out a long breath before speaking. The Lord is the one who watches over this world. He who has given us everything. Who has granted us the ability to grow and fight with monsters such as that. The man gestured toward the boar. Priscilla could already see where this was going, and so could he. Mash interrupted the man, having heard what he needed. This lord was either a god or the world owner. Either way, that person would probably have a way to get him to another world. It wouldn't really matter which world either, so long as he could use his skills it shouldn't matter. The trial was secondary in his mind. He could always try that again. Until he found one that was straightforward and could be done quickly. This trial hadn't given him any direction and felt like it would waste a lot of time. He didn't know how much time he had, but he imagined spending days here wouldn't do anyone any good. Where can I find them? And does this lord have magic? Like shooting fire from his hands or something? Mash didn't really mind interrupting the man. He already knew that it would be better for them if he got through this conversation as quickly as possible. The Lord resides in the holy mountain of Temur Fall. There is little the Lord cannot do. Like you, the Lord has strength far beyond me. Although, in truth, I know little of the Lord's stories beyond his physical might. That wasn't a relief to hear. In his jump earlier, Mash hadn't seen any dungeon portals or any traces of how his own journey to this world. Not wanting to dwell on that possibility, he urged the man on. Can we talk somewhere else? I really just need some food, water, and a way to carry them. Also, a map. If your village has that, you can take the whole beast there, and I will even kill some more on the way. The man clearly didn't like that response. His frown grew deeper, and the lines on his face became more pronounced. He replied with the old voice of a wizened sage. But he didn't seem that much older than Mash's own father. I do not believe it would be wise to bring you to the village. Regardless of how much food and fur you can offer us. He stopped speaking as the woman standing behind him whispered something into his ear. Mash could hear them clearly, but he couldn't understand a single word. He didn't get involved either, but they seemed to come to a decision after a few moments. The man nodded to something the woman said and began to speak. I will take you there, but the rest of my family will go to inform the village first. We will follow after a few moments. Mash was a little annoyed but wasn't going to argue. Will they be okay if another monster comes out? And do they want to take this one with them? The boy beside the leader seemed to understand some of what Mash had just said, and he licked his lips with obvious desire. Mash stepped away from the carcass, jutting his hands toward it in a go-ahead gesture. Now that he saw the whole group, he could easily tell that it was one united family. The person who had been speaking to him was the father, and the woman that kept whispering at the others was the mother. And they seemed to have 2 children, one boy and one girl. Their resemblance made that obvious to him now. He really should have realized it earlier. It will be fine, and my son will collect as much as he can carry safely. And no more. The last part wasn't directed at Mash, and the boy's enthusiasm died a little. He was still smiling though and cut himself a large chunk of the monster. Big enough, that Mash thought he would struggle to carry it. It probably weighed as much as the boy himself. He had also picked a piece that still had all of its fur on, probably intending on keeping the hide too. Seeing that Mash wasn't doing anything to stop him, the other 2 similarly took pieces of the beast. Mash stepped slightly to the side with the man and tried to get a more normal conversation going. What's your name, and what's this world like? Anything's particularly more dangerous I should know about? The father grunted at that, before responding. Plenty. The Lord is not even the strongest, there are beings in the skies and seas that can rival him. He is the Lord of the land. I am Chief Arushi. You have met my wife, Sierra. My son Rushi and my daughter Aera. Mash thought about his own world and acknowledged that there were probably monsters in the seas that could rival gods. And he already knew that there were dragons among the skies. As he listened to their names, he did have another thought. His eyes glinted with greed as he asked his next question. Are there any special items? Or things with cool abilities like being covered in flame? There are a few items with the things you describe, but they all belong to the Lord. The best we have is metal such as this. The man drew an axe that had been strapped to his back. Its shaft was made of black wood, and the blade was red like blood. He eyed the strange weapon before asking. Can I? The man nodded and held the axe for Mash to take. Mash grabbed the weapon by the proffered handle and investigated the material. He didn't feel any magic in it, but the metal was definitely special. The wooden handle of the weapon was covered in marks and scratches, but the blade had no blemishes. The color wasn't even smudged anywhere. He swung it a few times, amazed at how well balanced the weapon was. The metal was obviously heavy, but the wood easily matched it and handled the burden too. He pressed the blade against his palm. It didn't cut immediately. He frowned and applied some extra force. The blade wasn't sharpened all that well, but he eventually managed to get it to cut him. His blood slowly slid down his palm. It was thicker than normal and had a deeper red color than was strictly human too. The speed at which the cut healed was similarly monstrous. Mash already knew what to expect but the others didn't, and they stared with more than a little fascination. Fear too, but mostly fascination. Yeah, that's what I meant when I said I was mostly human. But I still bleed like anyone else. He said that knowing that Red would in fact not bleed like a normal person. Mash himself wouldn't if he had access to his forms and magics. He kept that to himself as the family in front of him continued harvesting the creature. He went back to speak with the chief. This metal isn't very sharp, don't you think something else would be better? It is a hard metal to cut. The fact that the blacksmith could get it this sharp was already more than we had thought possible. We only have a few weapons of this quality. The man's words dashed his hopes of getting the metal. Well, it might actually not be that hard to get some of the metal. He just wouldn't be able to get it in a good shape. They might have some large chunks or nuggets that he could get his hands on. They talked a little more as the rest of the family departed for their hometown. Mash walked through the forest with Arushi. Mash dragged 3 of the boar things. They were tied together by a rope. The weight was too much for the chief, but he managed it easily. Their passage left the forest in a mess though since he had to knock down more than a few trees to fit the bodies. One hand was holding the rope, but the other was holding one of the monster's legs. He had torn it off to snack on as they walked, much to his obvious disgust of Arushi. Chapter 318, The Same People. They were close though, and Mash began to pick up the signs of life with his improved senses. Things like marks on trees, or the sounds and signals that could only come from another person. Eroshi's words confirmed what he already realized. We are almost there. The truth was confirmed again as they broke through the tree line. The village was placed in the center of a clearing, and Mash could see it clearly once he got out of the forest. The village was more like a town as he knew it. There was a wooden wall erected around the buildings, and he could only see a few roofs from the outside. The walls were made of simple wooden stakes, but he did notice that several people were standing on a narrow walkway along the top of it. Despite the gentle conversation that they had been in thus far, the chief grew oddly silent as they approached the village itself. Mash didn't try to force a conversation since it was clear that the chief felt uncomfortable. The crunching grass underfoot, and the mixed sounds behind the village's walls were the only things in the air. I believe this qualifies as suspicious behavior. Mash gave a mental nod of agreement but didn't do anything. He wanted to see how it would play out. Eroshi was close enough that he doubted it would be anything violent. Although, he did let his gaze wander a little more fervently. Once they were about halfway to the village, Eroshi finally said something. Sorry. The word came as the sky was filled with hundreds of arrows. Arrows that were coming from every direction. From archers who hid outside of his domain's range. Now, how had they noticed his domain? He didn't give that question much consideration, another popped into his head to replace it. How did Eroshi plan on dealing with all the arrows? His gaze darted to his side, and he saw Eroshi praying. His face filled with resolve and resignation as he waited for the arrows to fall. Mash shook his head and stepped a little in front of the chief. He still had the rope with the monsters in one hand and swung it hard as he could. His power was too much for the rope and it snapped. Even still the force of his swing disrupted some of the arrows. It was as if he chucked a block wind at the coming arrows. Some of them veered off course, but others hit their mark. 3 arrows struck Mash. One smacked lamely against his leg. The black stone that tipped the blade didn't cut through his clothing. They were as durable as he was and were only further improved by the changes to his body. Another arrow bounced off his chest. He felt a little invincible at that. The final arrow broke that sensation. It struck him in the side of his neck, having been shot by one of the archers that were hidden in the grass beyond his domain. He was shocked that the arrow had managed to pierce his skin. The arrow lodged itself in his neck, and he stumbled to the side a little as blood began to fill his throat. It ran down outside of his throat too, but that came out a small stream. His muscles tensed to stifle the blood flow immediately. It hurt, but not a lot. Mash turned and looked at Eroshi. The man had several arrows in him. A few had punched into his right side, but Mash had managed to block any that came from the front. Mash shook his head as the man stared at him in disbelief. Mash's wound was more dangerous than it looked, and he yanked the arrow out easily. He dropped the weapon at Eroshi's feet as the wound on his neck closed. He swallowed a few times, the blood would make it hard to speak. Why? You saw me earlier, did you really think that would work? If I didn't bother protecting you, I could have easily dodged them all. The attack, while impressive for a normal village, wouldn't be able to harm him. 1,000 volleys like that wouldn't do much. His bones were by far one of the strongest parts of his body, and he doubted they had the power to cut through those. Any other injury, he could heal. They didn't know all that, but Eroshi had seen him handle the monsters. All 3 of which were riddled with arrows now. No, I didn't think they would work. I just hoped that they could cut you though. Eroshi coughed. His words were strained by his pain. Mash got the meaning immediately. How bad is the poison? Mash sent the message. He checked his own pulse, but Priscilla would have a better picture than him. You are fine. The treant's regenerative nature is quite adept at handling poisons. Not to mention the resistance that has come from a combination of many of the monsters. He didn't respond to the mention and just looked at Eroshi. The man didn't look immune to the poison. Mash stepped away from the man. He would just go to the village and take what he wanted. All he really needed was a single map, and he didn't want to deal with this anymore. He really had no luck when it came to people, did he? Eroshi coughed again, and Mash let out a loud groan. One filled with all the annoyance he could muster. He turned around and picked up Eroshi. You better have a damn good map. The man wasn't heavy. At least there weren't any more arrows. They probably assumed that a single volley was enough. Especially if the poison was as deadly as Eroshi implied. Mash saw the men atop the wall begin to panic when they realized what Mash was doing. Dashing toward their village wouldn't do anything for his image, but he didn't care. He charged at the walls and held Arushi out. He hoped that it would stop any further arrows. They didn't have the time to fire another volley. At a full sprint, Mash was more than fast enough to reach the walls long before the archers could get ready. As he approached the walls, Mash realized that they weren't that tall. They were bigger than the boars, but not that big. He jumped and pushed off the ground. The wall flashed beneath him, as he leaped over it. The archers atop the wall just stared in disbelief. Arushi screamed with the rushing wind. Mash didn't feel amused. He landed beyond the walls. He avoided the buildings but cracked the ground with the force. A lot of people rushed to surround him. Mash didn't give them the time for composure and threw Arushi at the forming group. He could have been gentler but didn't care to. The gathering warriors tumbled as they attempted to catch Arushi. Mash scanned the village in the meantime. He would get what he wanted and leave. The village wasn't as small as it looked from the outside. There were a little over 30 homes that he could make out easily. 2 of which were obviously larger and nicer. All the homes were made of wood. He easily spotted the blacksmith as it was the only building made of brick. He saw several of the red-metalled weapons. Most were just simple hammers, but he saw one that drew his attention. More people dashed out from beside buildings. Many were obviously terrified, but they preserved and held up black-tipped spears. Mash ignored them, dashing through the crowd. 2 people thrust spears at him. He easily dodged them and walked over to the blacksmith. There were some noises inside the building. Oddly, it sounded like a person working. Really, who would continue to work when their home was supposedly under attack? He shook his head and reached for the weapon. It was a tall piece of metal. It wasn't particularly sharp, but it wasn't smooth either. It almost looked like a piece of something that had been broken. However, he thought it would work well as a staff. As the metal was not smoothed in a way, it was more like grabbing onto a staff made of teeth. It had awkward ridges and some places jutted out with sharp edges. Some places could probably even cut through his skin, not that an injury like that would matter much. He picked up the staff of red metal. The staff that looked nothing like a proper staff. The sharp jagged piece of metal that would like to serve better as part of a barricade. It was heavy for a weapon, but he swung it easily enough. With his domain, he could feel more people fill the streets around him, but he ignored them and looked toward Arushi. The man was being made to drink something. "I'm keeping this. Give me a map and a water skin too." That seemed like a fair trade for saving his life. Plus, they couldn't stop him from taking it. Arushi coughed to clear his throat. It was the wet cough that came after drinking something syrupy. He didn't say anything to Mash, just nodded. He spoke to one of the men beside him, though Mash couldn't understand what was said. If another attack came, Mash wouldn't let them go with just a warning. If they did anything now, then they were just suicidal. A man ran off, presumably to get him what he wanted. Arushi got to his feet, slowly. He had been half sitting on the ground as they tended to his wounds. Someone had to help him just to stand. And they continued to help him, as Arushi walked over to Mash. "Why save me? Why do any of this? I feel like I should be asking that. What was the point of all this? What do you think would happen if you killed me?" Mash's words were sharpened by his mood. "You are evil. You have power that should only belong to the Lord. You claim to have come from his home. Dare to act like one of his equals. I had to try. Failure is the same as death. The Lord will hear of this and know that we had failed to uphold his honor." Only a few people around him seemed to understand the language. The ones that did, looked just as distressed as Arushi. Mash looked into the older man's eyes and saw his faith. That unshakable belief in his Lord and their power. Mash shook his head and replied coldly. "That's just stupid." They said little else. A man ran back with the map and water skin as requested. Mash took it and turned to leave. He was done here. As he did so, he heard a roar coming from the entrance of the building that he stood in front of. The blacksmith stood in the doorway. An orange-red sword was held in one hand as he stared at Mash in horror. Mash analyzed the blade, certain that it was sharper than the axe he had seen earlier. The man ran towards Mash, shouting something that he could not understand. He had a thick fuzzy beard of grey hair but was bald otherwise. The man had the same tan skin as the rest of the people, but he was so wrinkled that it looked like leather on him. He wore what looked like an apron made of the same fur as all of their clothing. It was a weird outfit. The man had thick arms, and he lunged for the staff in Mash's hand. Mash pulled the staff out of the way. "I'm keeping this." The blacksmith adapted quickly to the language and replied without hesitation. "That is no weapon. It was just a part of the metal I used to forge this sword. Let me at least shape it. Turn it into a proper staff. I can't let my craft amount to that." Mash shook his head. "No, I'm fine with how it is." The blacksmith didn't reply. His gaze had turned to more than the staff, and he seemed to take in the surroundings. He took a step back and dropped to his knees. It was the same gesture that Eroshi had done earlier. "Your Holiness, I am Gus the blacksmith. I beg you to let me forge that into something that would suit your blood. That is but a piece of scrap. I could not let you carry something like that from my forge." Mash was about to speak, but Eroshi beat him to it. "He is not one of the Lord's children." "Silence! Young Eroshi, you forget the Lord's words. To be a lord or one of his children, all that is required is strength. I know that you can feel this man's presence as well as I. Whether approved yet or not, he possesses the Lord's blood." The blacksmith's words were said with the kind of wisdom that people believed. And Mash could feel as more people dropped to their knees around him. Eroshi himself joined the crowd. Mash only let it continue for 5 seconds. 5 hated seconds was what it took for him to react. Chapter 319, Red Metal. "Stand up. I hate gestures like that." Just as before, everyone shot to their feet as if he was the Lord himself. They were scared before. Now they were mortified, some of them looked ready to die right then and there. Mash's frown deepened. "Don't bother with all this. I'm going to that stupid mountain. I don't want to waste any time here. Definitely not going to wait for you to make a weapon." Gus didn't seem afraid of Mash, but he seemed horrified by that idea. "The mountain? Of course, you must wish to speak to the Lord. But a map? We would obviously provide you with an escort, and I would accompany you to forge the weapon if needed." The blacksmith was being polite. Mash was doubtful though. He had never heard of a blacksmith forging something while traveling. Eroshi spoke next. His voice filled with worry. It was as if the blacksmith's words had ignited a new set of fears. "We can't send an escort now. You know what is coming." The blacksmith said something in the language he couldn't understand, but he filled in the words with his mind. "You fool! Not only did you attack him, but you want to even leave him without a proper guide." It seemed to fit considering the way that the chief deflated with every word. When Eroshi spoke again, he magically seemed ready to acquiesce to the blacksmith's every claim. "In hopes of earning your forgiveness, we will certainly send one of our best hunters with you to act as an escort. The honored elder Gus has already given his intentions to be part of the escort, and we will pick out a great chef as well. If that would appease your holiness, we cannot spare anyone else." Mash shook his head. Eroshi's expression fell but warped to distress as Mash spoke. "No, I don't need an escort. It will just slow me down. Just give me the map and point me in the right direction." Gus spoke and replied in place of Eroshi. "We could never do such a thing. Our village has 2 sky grazers, we will send you with them." Mash could gather what a sky grazer was from the name. He would have refused, but a flying creature would certainly be able to get him to the mountain quickly. Plus, he might be able to find an excuse to kill it and gain another form. It was hard to tell since he didn't have his forms, but he figured it would be a good idea to eat as many different creatures as he could. Also, he liked the idea of flying instead of running. "Fine." Gus smiled, beaming at the agreement. He nodded like it was the obvious decision, and Eroshi looked resigned to his fate. It seemed like Eroshi did that a lot either way, everything went easily after that. It was awkward though. The villagers who had been trying to kill him only moments ago apologized like a small child who got caught eating too many sweets. It was kind of sad to see them act so pathetic. His anger had wilted in the face of their fear and desperation. The blacksmith's words changed the crowd's perception. A perception that felt flimsy with how much it was swayed. Though maybe that just meant that the village was dependent on its leaders, and he guessed that it was the same everywhere. Mash began to see the village as something else. It was kind of like a pet to their so-called lord. So desperate and obsessed to earn the Lord's praise, that they would do absolutely anything to that end. Honestly, the situation disgusted him. He felt like he shouldn't get angry at them but at their owner instead. It took Eroshi and Gus around an hour to get everything ready, During that hour, Mash was given more than a small amount of food and gifts in apology. He ate the food, and politely rejected most of the gifts since he couldn't carry them. Although he did accept a pack that strapped around his shoulders and hung on his back comfortably. Once everything was ready, he left without giving the rest of the people the chance to apologize. Mash approached the sky grazers. And they were interesting creatures. The creatures were a mix between a chicken and a hawk. They had long legs and fat bodies but wings so long that they dragged on the ground as the creatures moved. Probably never walked on the ground if they could avoid it. Maybe they hung like bats? They were covered in black feathers and had a saddle strapped to their back. Each bird could probably carry 4 or 5 people. Mash saw Irushi and his wife on one bird, and Gus on the other. Gus had many tools that Mash had never seen before. The staff that he had tried to take laid at his feet. The blacksmith was fervently waving at Mash to join them. Mash sighed and walked over to the man. The blacksmith started talking as soon as he could. What do you want for the weapon? A staff is simple enough, but I can manage something a little more complicated. Nothing too fancy with this metal, but I can do better than this. I like the shape. With edges like that, every side would be dangerous, but it could still function as a staff. My old weapon was something like that but had wide blades on both ends. And it kind of looks like it's covered in a ton of small teeth. It fits, in a weird way. Mash found that explaining what he wanted was easy. Having held the staff earlier, he had an image of what he wanted already. The blacksmith was quick to understand too. He nodded happily and replied with eager enthusiasm. A staff with teeth. I can work with that. The blacksmith's gusto confused Mash more than anything he'd experienced so far. Why go so far? I was kind of a terror to your village. Mash didn't have to say more to explain anything. He could hear Irushi and his wife whispering. Even without knowing the language, it was obvious to know who they were talking about. You are a great being. Even if you are not related to the Lord directly. I have felt his aura, and yours might exceed his. A weapon for you should be as good as one I would make for the Lord. The words earned more questions. What do you mean by an aura? Aura. It is like the amount of space your presence takes up, and the force behind it. The sensation that a pest might feel in front of a sky grazer. Not everyone can feel it like me, though most of our fighters can at least notice it. When I met you, I felt like a bug. Mash had a sneaking suspicion that he knew what the man was talking about. How big would you say that my aura is? The man shrugged as he replied. Around 70 or 80 paces. That was what Mash expected. It was his domain, and he itched to check his status. Although, he had tried and failed to check it already. This world seemed to prevent even that, even though that didn't use any mana. Or maybe it used a minuscule amount. He dismissed the thought and climbed onto the bird's back. How far is this mountain anyway? Gus didn't answer. He worked on the piece of metal instead. One of the tools in his hand was a long glass tube. Inside it was some strange blue fluid. He pressed one end of the tube against the metal and Mash heard a sizzling sound. Mash watched in fascination for a few minutes, then Gus paused and put the tube back into a case. He spoke then, revealing that he had heard Mash. It should only take 8 nights. Lisa P.O.V. Lisa and the others hadn't actually gone into the dungeon after Mash. They had told him that they would, but the group planned on nothing of the sort. Red only told her once Mash was gone, but the plan was actually to wait for his return. Red had explained that their group was actually poor at dungeons without Mash. While Jill was good at avoiding damage, they relied on his domain for a lot, especially when it came to avoiding traps. The dungeon before them had its fair share of traps, and they weren't planning on entering. There was actually another dungeon nearby that they could head to if needed. It would be significantly easier, but it would still give them a level at least. Rather than entering the dungeon, the group waited to see if Mash would come out. The sun had gone down more than an hour ago, and Lisa was getting worried. He was supposed to be back now. The plan was to come back before dinner, and it was definitely too late for that. She paced back and forth rapidly. The others were already asleep. Why weren't they worried? Their casual assurance that he would be fine seemed ridiculous with caution that they kept for themselves. Did they just not care about him? She knew that wasn't the case but had asked the question to herself many times. She finally snapped and just decided to confront one of them. She walked out of her tent in a rush. It wasn't really a tent, rather it was more like a small house. It even had a fireplace and a chimney to release the smoke. It felt a lot colder outside. Despite the endless winter of her old home, she felt weirdly cold now. She hadn't felt like that when the sun was up, but the night felt dangerous now. It was a childish fear. The unfounded fear that someone would come from the shadows and place a collar around her neck. She rubbed at her neck as she stepped up to Red's tent. Although she didn't try to enter or call out to her. Honestly, Red scared her. Logically, Lisa knew that Red wasn't the same as the nobles from her home, but their confidence was the same. She never could tell if it was an act or not, and Red spoke with all the self-assuredness as anyone. And then there was the intensity with which spoke. It made her knees shake, and she decided to try someone else. Not Luke. She didn't feel comfortable meeting with any man in the night and settled on Jill. Again, she froze in front of the tent. She hesitated. An image of an angry Jill flashed across her mind. Anyone would be angry if they were rudely awoken in the middle of the night. When she heard whispering inside, she sagged in some relief. Jill was awake, but who was she talking to? Lisa felt a little awkward, but she leaned an ear against the side of the tent. It might just be her paranoia, but she couldn't help but be suspicious. The only one she could read easily was Mash, the others were good at hiding their emotions. Mash's emotions leaked through his face and domain, even when Priscilla tried to help him. I can't teleport to him. That shouldn't be possible. I can literally cross worlds. Jill was rushing through her words. Her frustration was clear, and her desperation was heavy. What about his world? If you can go there, then he might notice or something. Luke replied, his voice heavy with concern. The reality dawned on Lisa. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Slowly, she fell to her knees. Her head fell into her hands as the truth became obvious. They did care. They probably cared more than she did, but they had lied for her benefit. It was a little degrading, but she knew it was reasonable. Despite her attempts to be friendly, they could tell that she didn't trust them the same way. Lisa knew that she depended on Mash. For all that she knew it wasn't the best idea, she could help but see him as her savior. And now that savior was gone, maybe even dead. It might have been desperation, but she found some comfort in seeing the mark in her status, and her focus drifted inward. Name, Lisa. Class, Bonded Mana Dancer. Level, 138. Health, 1980/1980. Stamina, 2010/2010. Mana, 5110/5110. Fortitude, 198. Endurance, 201. Strength, 101. Agility, 302. Intelligence, 511. Wisdom, 200. Charisma, 312. Free stats, 0. Skills, Sheriff's Mana, Mana Armor, Haste, Master's Message, Leads Supporter, Mana Signature, Temporary Mana Battery, Dancer's Pole, Partner of Mana, Mask of the Slave, Bound Dancer's Chain, The Devourer's First Marked. The Devourer's First Marked, unique, the first to be marked by the Devourer, your growth is chastened by their influence. Struggle to avoid becoming the creature's next meal. The monster's interest is not without benefit. Gain levels more rapidly. Grow quickly, for your time will be limited by its patience. Chapter 320, Different Directions. Lisa P.O.V. One night had changed to 2 and the truth had come out. Mash was either trapped or dead. Either way, there was nothing that she could do to find him. Red, Jill, and Luke were just as worried. They had given up on shielding Lisa from the truth. They had spent most of the second day, trying different things to check if he was alive. Their mood wasn't improved by Priscilla either. She had been worming into their thoughts, especially because of how dangerous she was. Without Mash's situation being known, Priscilla was becoming an unknown quantity. Priscilla had insisted that she would maintain the current situation for now. Apparently, she had promised that she would keep acting in Mash's best interest until his friends and family died. It was reassuring to hear those words, but there wasn't anyone to enforce them. Lisa had overheard Red and the others discussing Priscilla more than once. Apparently, Priscilla had bodies in a lot of places, and they couldn't know what each body was doing. That was how their second day had gone. With dealing with all the implications of a missing Mash. And there were a lot of things to deal with. They needed to inform an insane amount of important people. Not least of which included the king himself. Lisa, are you awake? Lisa flinched, but she relaxed when she recognized the voice. She didn't climb out of her bedroll though and just called out. Yes, you can come in. Red didn't smile as she walked into the tent home. She looked down at Lisa, and her eyes were a little more pink than normal. Lisa couldn't conjure an image of Red crying and remained silent as Red stood there. Red took a long breath before speaking. The war is starting. Both inside and out. The north and south were obvious, but some of the beastmen cities are also fighting. To be completely honest, we don't know what to do. We all kind of expected Mash to be here for this. He would usually rush us to a decision by making one himself. That didn't happen this time. I wanted to hear what you think. He's not dead. I mean, I don't think that he is. I still have the mark. Lisa knew how petulant that response sounded, but she couldn't accept it. She moved to a sitting position to try and meet Red's eyes with dignity. There was no way he would just die like that. Heroes didn't die like that. Alone, in an unknown place, without reason. She couldn't accept that the world would do something like that. Even after everything, that just seemed too cruel. Red didn't argue, instead, she accepted it and moved on. I hope you're right. Even if that is the case, he isn't here now. We need to decide what to do next. Whatever we do, I think you should go your own way. I wanted to hear your opinion first, but I don't think you fit in a war. What are you saying? Lisa didn't like how her voice quivered. Fear was settling in though. They were going to abandon her. Even if it was meant for her own benefit, she didn't like the image of her life without her protectors. Alone, she had nothing besides her levels, and she knew the worth of that all too well. No, she wouldn't let that happen. Being with the others made her feel important. She didn't quite understand how the politics here functioned, but it wasn't hard to notice how many different important people paid attention to this group. She could get stronger without them. The mark would help her level. What she couldn't get easily was the status. She knew that levels alone wouldn't protect her. The thought made her rub at the side of her neck. I just mean, that we aren't going to be in safe places. If we lose a battle in the north, we could wind up as slaves. If it's in the south, it could be undead abominations. Red's words gave Lisa goosebumps. The very thought of becoming a slave again bothered her. She would rather become an undead servant to one of the southern necromancers. At least, she would be dead in that situation. She found herself saying just as much. I don't mind the danger. No one gets to my level without danger. But can we go south instead? Lisa tried to sound confident, but she gave up near the end. Her fear of the collar pushed her away from the north. Red's eyes narrowed into blades, but she nodded. If you want to stick around, then I won't stop you. Despite everything, you are still an adult, and older than me. I will go tell the others and I will see about getting a mission to the south. You know you don't. Never mind, just pack your tent when you wake up. Red left after saying her piece, and Lisa's shoulders dropped as she sagged against her bed. That went as well as she could have hoped. She wondered what the war would be like. She had seen battles before, but they had usually been against monsters. Most of the fights against people were one-sided. It usually came down to those above level 100 but below 200. The reason was simple. 2 people at 100 might have the strength to destroy a city. 2 people at 200 could definitely destroy a continent. No, people at that level were teleported into temporary spaces for fights. Around the major cities, even those over 150 would get teleported. Would she have to fight someone an advancement higher? That night, Lisa didn't fall asleep. Her mind had managed to conjure a million different scenarios for her death. Those alone wouldn't ruin her night. It was the thought of becoming a slave again that had truly kept her up. Either way, she had not gotten any sleep. And felt more tired from trying. Packing up the tent and her supplies was easy. One of the first things that she had been given was a storage item, in the form of an amulet that was hidden behind her shirt. After that was done, she just waited for the others to wake up. It was early. The sun hadn't risen yet. Jill was the first to leave her tent. She came out, in what was a large thin shirt, and very short shorts. Good morning. I think you should change into something warmer. Lisa tried to be polite, but also glanced around to see if anyone else was there. Jill didn't seem to care much for her modesty, but then again, the outfit wasn't really revealing or sensual. Maybe people here just were more okay with revealing their sleepwear. Jill didn't respond. Her half-closed eyes said that she wasn't really awake and probably hadn't heard anything. Lisa was about to try again when the sudden rush of sunlight turned her head. The sun peeked over the tree line. The shadows of the trees dragged across the ground as the light illuminated the world in an orange hue. She just stared at the sky for a moment, before remembering Jill even existed. But when she turned to check, Jill was gone. The flap of her tent closed, as she went back inside. It was only after an hour of not hearing anything from within the tent that Lisa realized the truth. Jill had only come out to see the sunrise. Who did that? Lisa didn't think people worked like that. Red was the first to actually wake up. Then came Luke and the final person was Jill. Lisa decided not to comment about the strangeness from earlier in the morning and waited for the others to eat some breakfast. Lisa prepared some simple sandwiches with meats and cheese. After finishing her meal, Red told them of the plan. They would head south to a city called Cape End. It was the most fortified city in the south and would be the center point of combat there. They would get more specific orders there. It would take around 3 days to get there normally, but Jill could speed them up with teleports. The fastest method would have been to have Mash carry Jill. Then Jill would teleport the rest of them. That worked because Mash's speed was barely affected by carrying someone, and his speed was ridiculous. If he wasn't here, the next best method was to have Jill repeatedly teleport to the limits of her vision, and then grab the rest of them when she got to the destination, or if she wanted to take a break. That was all that really happened for the whole trip. And each day was harder than the last as they grew more worried about Mash. Lisa still found some comfort in feeling the mark. In knowing that it was still there and working. Hopefully, that meant that he was alive. Mash P.O.V. Mash was not enjoying the flight. His escort, which consisted of Gus, Arushi and his wife Sierra, was not a fun group. Arushi and his wife were overly apologetic and fearful, and they talked about their kids almost exclusively. Even without knowing their language, Mash had heard the kids' names pass between their mouths many times on the trip. He wondered why the two of them had even come. Gus was annoyingly focused on his craft. Mash had spent most of the journey just watching the man work. Blacksmithing here was very different from what he knew. The metal was never melted or even heated. The man used different solutions to burn away things from the metal. Controlling the liquid seemed to be the most difficult part of the process. It explained why their weapons never got that sharp. It got boring quickly. The final thing he watched was the world itself. They had mostly flown over forests, but they had made frequent stops for meals. Mash had killed several new monsters. Nothing with special abilities, but he had seen a lizard that shot its tail out like an arrow. With all that said, this world was unremarkable. He felt kind of bad thinking that, but it just was. If he hadn't changed his body so much, he could see the danger. If he had come here as a normal human, then he certainly would have died. He wasn't human, and he certainly wasn't normal. None of the things he had encountered had even been remotely threatening. At least the journey was almost over. He could see the mountain in the distance now. He guessed it was big, but it wasn't particularly impressive. The mountains back home were larger. The skies were wider. The magic was grander. A world without that magic was bland, and he wanted to go back. He felt somewhat empty without his magic, and his endless sense of hunger wasn't helping. Mash looked at Gus. He was on the other bird, and Mash could still see the man working. If he didn't finish soon, it would be too late, and he wouldn't wait for it either. The final leg of the journey went by slowly. He was so eager near the end, that he just jumped from the saddle. Wind rushed past him as he fell, and his landing left a mark on the ground. The dirt got pushed aside as if he were a boulder. Mash grinned, turning and waiting for the birds to land. Mash walked over to Gus to tell him that he was too late when the blacksmith pulled out the staff from what looked like an enormous metal tube. It was large enough to fit the entire weapon. Bluish liquid dripped from the weapon as he held it for Mash to examine. It was a long red staff that now resembled a staff more accurately. That being said, it kept the jagged design in an interesting way. The teeth motif that Mash had suggested was more than represented. Dozens of different teeth-like shards jutted from the staff. They were perfectly mirrored on the top and bottom half, creating a well-balanced weapon. Despite not having a perfect way to shape the metal, Mash was impressed by the design. The teeth on the staff weren't super sharp but had grooves and edges that made them look like real teeth. Had the metal been white instead of red, it would have looked like actual teeth. Almost as if reading his thoughts, Gus pulled out one final tube. "I forgot. Pour this over the metal, and it will change the color to match the design." Mash stared at the tube in disbelief. There was no way the blacksmith would know what color to bring. Why did you bring white paint? Gus revealed his own teeth with a smile, before responding. I brought every color.